Hi, everyone, and welcome to what is the first and will hopefully be a series of Wwise tutorials where we cover different ways of implementing audio in both Unreal and Unity Engine. This specific video is going to cover what I did for a recent game jam, which features an unseen monster sort of prowling around the player, which we can hear in this video. So this will be a quick implementation tutorial. As you can hear, it involves spatial audio and a little bit of programming, and I'm going to help you along the way. So let's dive into it. So on our agenda for this video, we're going to begin with what sound effects to use. I'm just going to briefly show me working on a few sound effects. I'm also going to leave my sound effects in the description if you don't have your own. We're going to do the Unity scene setup, so the basics from a new scene in Unity from scratch, what you should be setting up. We'll do it together before we move into the Radial spawning code, which is the code that's going to spawn in our object that will represent and be our sound effects. Then we're going to move into the Wwise project, and we're going to get everything set up in Wwise. We're going to get all of our audio clips hooked up. We're going to make sure our sound banks are generated. And most importantly, we're going to make sure that all of our audio is spatialized on the Wwise side so that when the sound effect is played in Unity, Wwise and Unity know that that sound should be spatialized. And then we're going to do final touches to make sure that all the setup we did in Wwise is properly hooked up to Unity, and then we'll have our project. So the first thing you're going to need is a footstep sound effect. Feel free to use whatever you have on hand. If you have a sound effect that you made previously or downloaded somewhere, feel free to use that. All we need is an audio file. This is just footage of me kind of playing around with a pocket knife that I found. I really like the way that it created this heel to toe motion against a stack of Post-its that was sort of indicative of a footstep sound. And so I just decided to use that. It was quick and easy for the sake of a game jam. But again, feel free to use whatever you have on hand. But I will link below the files that I used in case you want to download and use those if you don't have any on hand. So diving straight into scene setup now within Unity, I've got with me right here a blank starting from scratch scene, which I'm going to bring a 3D object plane into, reset its transform so it's in the center of the world. I'm going to select the main camera, go to game object and align with view so that my camera has a nice overview of the stage. And then I'm going to add another 3D game object, a cube, that's just going to be a stand-in for the player game object. And that game object, we're later going to put the script on for spawning the SFX. I'm going to create a sphere as well. And this sphere is basically going to be the representation of our sound effect for the sake of the tutorial. I'm going to rename it SFX point, reset it, bring it slightly next to the cube. And whenever the player script spawns in the sound effect around the player, this sphere is essentially what we're going to bring in, and that sphere will have all of our game audio attached to it when the time comes. Now I'm going to go to the player. I'm going to add a script. This script is where all our functionality is going to happen. For the sake of the tutorial, I'm just going to call it monster SFX underscore tutorial. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to do create and add, and then I'm going to open that up in Visual Studio. Now that we've got our script created and we've opened it up in Visual Studio, the first thing we're going to do is create a public reference to a game object. And we're going to call this game object SFX object. And this is basically going to be the reference to that sphere we created in the scene that will later have all of our audio information on it. Then we're going to create a vector 3 for spawn location and a vector 2 for spawn adjustment. And what this is basically going to do is we're going to start with a spawn location that will start at the player, and then we're going to adjust those values a bit because they will be randomly generated. And then we're going to use the adjustment to update the initial spawn location, and then that spawn location is where we'll spawn in the SFX object. So we're going to do spawn lock equals game object.transform.position. So the spawn location is going to start where the player is. Spawn adjustment is going to be random.inside unit circle times 7. Feel free to change the 7 if you want the object to spawn farther or closer. This will impact the audio spatialization later. Feel free to play with that. And so the spawn adjustment is going to be an X and Y value randomly generated within the parameters of a unit circle. Spawn location is going to be new vector 3. And we're going to take the spawn location that we started with, which is where the player is. We're going to adjust that by our randomly generated value X, which is spawn adjustment.x. The Y is 0.5. That doesn't change unless you want the elevation to change. Feel free to modify that later. And then spawn location.z plus spawn adjustment.y, because remember, spawn adjustment is just an X and Y value, and we want that second value, the Y value, to adjust the Z axis around the player. Then we're going to take game object spawned SFX object and do an instantiate. We're going to bring in the SFX object at our newly calculated spawn location at quaternion.identity. And then we're going to say spawn SFX object.setActive true. Now that we're back in the Unity scene, the first thing we're going to do is set the SFX point game object to our SFX object reference on our script. We're then going to go to the SFX point game object and deactivate it so it's not there when we play. Now we're going to play the game, give our code a try, and you can see that we've got a sphere spawning in a set distance from the cube player game object. Upon second play, it spawns in a slightly different location. A third time, and you'll see it's all spawning in a circle around our player game object, which is ideal for spatialization later. Now, one cool thing we can do with this script is because our SFX game object's location starts where the player is and then is adjusted by a random unit circle, we can move the player game object off to the side. And as you can see here, we still have our sphere spawn in a set distance from the player, regardless of the player's starting position. Now we're going to open up our Wwise project, and this is where the bulk of the work is going to happen. What we're going to do is create a new random container. I'm going to name it monster SFX footsteps RC for random container. I'm then going to select that random container. I'm going to import audio files, and I'm going to do add files. I'm going to go to the collection of footsteps sound effects that I've created prior to this project. And I'm going to grab all of those. I'm going to bring them in. And then you're going to hit import. And you can ignore this conflict. This shouldn't pop up for you. This is only popping up because I'm creating duplicate files because I've already had a lot of these files prior to the tutorial. And it's now confused because I'm creating multiple references to the same file. So it's wondering, what the heck am I going to do? I decided to use existing, and then what we're going to do after this is go to our random container. And as you can see in the dropdown, all of our SFX have been imported straight under the random container. So all of those footstep sound effects and all their variations have been added to it. I'm going to create a new random container, and we're basically going to do the exact same thing. We're going to name it monster SFX breathing, the random container. And I've also got some pre-made breathing sound effects. These are completely optional, but I'm going to show you how I set them up anyway. One cool thing we thought we would do when we were designing this game is mix in a little bit of growling with the footsteps. I'm going to import all of my breathing sound effects, and I'll also link those in the drive with the footstep sound effects in the description as well. So what I'm going to do here is go into both of these random containers, and where it says avoid repeating last, I'm going to do the last two play, just to guarantee that there's quite a bit of variation every time a sound effect is played. The next thing I'm going to do is create a new event through which we will fire these random containers and play a sound from them. I'm going to create an event. I'm going to call it monster SFX underscore event. Next, I'm going to add and do a play function. I'm going to right click the target area, go to browse. In the project explorer that pops up, I'm going to grab the monster SFX footsteps random container. And even though we're playing a container, it's going to take one randomly selected file from within that container and choose that to play. I'm also going to add a second play function, which will be the breathing container. Now, something really cool we decided we wanted to do when designing the game jam was that the breathing sound effect, it would be cool if it didn't play every time we heard the sound effects. And so here I basically randomize the probability of breathing playing to 50%. So coin flip whether or not breathing plays on top of the sound effects. And I also add a little bit of delay. So you may hear this, you'll hear the sound effects first, and then 0 to 3 seconds in, the breathing is going to accompany it, which we thought was kind of a cool effect and added a lot of variation to the sound that we were hearing. The next thing I'm going to do is go back to our random container, and under the positioning tab, this is very important, we're going to go to 3D spatialization and hit it to change it to position plus orientation. I'm also going to do attenuation. I'm going to create a new attenuation, and you can see this curve here basically is linked distance proportional to volume. I'm going to lower the max distance so that the change happens within a smaller space. And this is basically saying, hey, if the sound is right on top of the player where the audio listener is, it's going to be its loudest. And if you step to that maximum distance of 20, it's going to fade out to a volume of 0. And anywhere along that line and that distance, you're going to have a changing volume. So the volume is going to be attenuated. I did the same exact thing for the footsteps random container as I did for the breathing container. So both of those match, their attenuations match. And now that all of that is set up, our sound effects are basically ready to go. So I'm going to go to the sound banks tab, going to create a new sound bank under our default work unit. I'm going to call it monster SFX tutorial _ sound bank. Just keep everything under the monster SFX moniker. I'm going to go to our sound bank layout, going to drag over our event. I'm going to add that to our tutorial sound bank. I'm going to make sure our sound bank is selected, and then I'm going to basically generate that sound bank so it's ready to go within our Unity project. Now that we're back in the Unity scene once again, there's only a few final touches we need to make before we're ready to demonstrate the final product. First thing we're going to do is go to the Wwise global game object, and we need to add the sound bank that we just generated in the Wwise project. I'm going to add the AK bank script, and then under name, where it says no sound bank is currently selected, I'm going to hit monster SFX tutorial sound bank from the dropdown. Next thing we're going to do is go to the SFX point game object. We're going to add a component. We're going to do AK event. Similarly, under AK event, no event currently selected, we're going to go to our picker and grab the monster SFX _ event. Finally, and this is important, we're going to go to the main camera game object, and we're going to go find our AK audio listener, which by default will most likely be on your main camera. We're going to deactivate this because where the audio is spatialized around is the player and not necessarily the main camera. And so if we leave the audio listener on the camera, it's not really going to demonstrate the spatialization work that we did. To fix that, we're going to go to the player, and I added the AK audio listener script. Now we're going to play the game. And we can hear that object spawned a little bit forward and to the left of the player, so most of the sound effects came through the left channel. This is a great juxtaposition. That was hard pan to the right because the object spawned to the right of the player. That last one spawns right in front of the player, so we get a little bit of audio in both channels, and that one had a nice growl to it. And that's basically it. I've got a scene here where I basically just move the camera to the player, create a brief player controller, and change the lighting to black for more ambiance. You can see right there our code, our Y setup, everything is working very nicely. And we get even audio information from both the left and right channels all of it being randomly generated in a circle around the player. And as you turn, you can even hear the information move from one channel to the other, adding this really cool spatial effect. Now that's basically it for this tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. This is also my first tutorial, and I would love to know how I can improve and also what people might be interested in seeing. I know this video was a little bit quick. If people would prefer slower, more detailed, maybe more beginner level tutorials for Wwise and game design, I would love to do some of those. Just let me know what you guys think, and I hope this helped. Bye everyone.